Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I'm Donald Tobin. I'm the Dean of the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you here with us this evening. As most of you know, our environmental law program is one of the oldest and best in the country. The program was launched 32 years ago, and 2019 has been one of its most exciting and best years ever. The program's Transnational Environmental Accountability Project was named a finalist for the World Justice Program's Access to Justice Award. During 2019, faculty and students in the program made presentations in The Hague, in China, in Guinea, in Brazil, and Malaysia. Professor Seema Kakade was named the winner of the Environmental Law Institute's Environmental Futures Award, and she was elected a fellow in the American College of Environmental Lawyers. Professor Bob Percival was honored by the ABA for distinguished achievement in the environmental law and policy. The Environmental Law's annual Distinguished Lecture started more than a decade ago and has featured some of the top figures in environmental law and policy over the years. The lecture is known as the Fetter Lecture and is in honor of Joel and Ellen Fetter. It is through Joel and Ellen's outstanding contributions, shared passion for the environment, and the environmental law program that has made this lecture series and many other activities at the school possible. This year, we are bringing back the person who delivered the very first Fetter Lecture in February 2009. We all look a little different now. Jingjing Zhang was then known as the Erin Brockovich of China for her work with China's Center for Legal Assistance, pollution victims seeking legal redress for the victims of pollution in China. Now she is the director of the Environmental Law Program's Transnational Environmental Accountability Project, TEA, which focuses on combating environmental harm caused by multinational companies in the developing world. She will discuss the work in her lecture, which is called From National to Transnational Environmental Accountability. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and it is now my pleasure to pass the microphone to Professor Percival, who will introduce this year's Fetter Lecture, Jingjing Zhang.
I first met Jingjing in 2008, 11 years ago, when I had my last sabbatical. It's been that long. And I was teaching for a semester in Beijing at the China University of Political Science and Law. And it was a really remarkable class. One of these students is now one of the judges of the specialized environmental courts in China. Another one is now works for Client Earth in London, and Jingjing at the time was a litigator for Wang Sanfa Center for Legal Assistance to Pollution Victims. He set up a hotline where people could call from all over China with complaints about environmental problems, and she and her colleagues would go charging into court to try to seek redress for them. She got a lot of attention for that. The PBS Frontline program did a special that featured her, The Young and the Restless in China.
The spectacular economic boom that has created riches for so many has ravaged much of the countryside. Lawyers Wang Sanfa and Zhang Jingjing fight for the farmers and fishermen whose crops and catch are being destroyed.
And she was so sophisticated at knowing how to navigate the politics of an authoritarian regime that's really bad on human rights and other things, but had finally gotten religion about the need to clean up the environment. As she says here, our purpose is not to oppose the government, but to bring lawsuits in the public interest. She was then deemed the Erin Brockovich of China. The U.S. Embassy in Beijing gave her their Woman of Courage Award. She then came to the U.S., was a Yale World Fellow, and then an Open Society Fellow for 2 years, where her project was to monitor the impact of multinational corporations on environmental conditions in developing countries. She also quite happily fell in love, got married, had 2 kids, and moved to Bethesda. So it was our great fortune that she came to the university, and because our law school is so incredibly well managed, I don't think it took 2 weeks to get approval to bring her onto the faculty as a lecturer in law. It helped that she was coming with all her own money from the various foundations that love her work. But this has been such a great boon to students because we've been able to plug them into what's really happening on the front lines around the world in one of the most serious environmental issues. And we were thrilled when the project was named a finalist from an incredibly spectacular group of projects, so hundreds of projects from all over the world, trying to bring about environmental and social justice. And we were able to take students to The Hague for the World Justice Forum last year. So that's why she's entitled this lecture, From National to Transnational Environmental Accountability. She's going to talk about her old work in China and how she's now followed up on it with her work today with our students, trying to help poor communities all over the world. So take it away. Okay. So this should. If that doesn't, we can use those arrows.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Professor Possible, and dear colleagues and students and friends. And it's my honor to be here for the second time. And you have seen me and Professor Possible 10 years younger in the pictures. And yeah, time has changed us and has changed the world. So my talk is about from the national to transnational environmental accountability from a case study of my country, China. It's not a tiny case, isn't it? And I would like to walk you through with some cases I have dealt with since the year of 2000 and show how the changing global politics and the economy has brought new challenges to the environmental lawyer like me. 10 years ago, when I was standing here, and I was a litigation director for this, China's first environmental law clinic, and it was at the China University of Political Science and Law, where Professor Possible taught for a year, and he was loved by his Chinese students, and I learned from the citizenship and the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act from Professor Possible, as some of you learned from him here and this building. And I learned from 10 years ago. And we have learned various experience from the colleagues and scholars and angel partners from US. And we made our own public interest litigation 10 years later. And what happened in these 10 years? I was exactly 10 years ago standing here. And so I want to walk through the 10 years, what happened to the world and to myself as an environmental lawyer. And here's just outline of my talk, my background and the cases within China and outside China. And last is for the student is find your true north and find your career path. And I was basically an environmental lawyer, litigator, and I'm an activist lawyer. I call myself. I'm activist in the heart, and I use court to help the people, use the law to serve the people, and to shift the power from the corporation, from the government to the people who need our professional help. And since 2008, I was standing here. What happened to our world? I would just start from the 2008 when Professor Possible was in Beijing, and he watched some Olympic Games, I assume. And that game marked the peak of China's openness and transparency. And the international community gave China an opportunity to open up and to host this international event. And there was huge concern on the air quality in Beijing, but Beijing has overcome some difficulties and organized quite a successful event. And in the same year, in 2008, China passed our first ever Open Government Information Act, and which became a very good legal avenue for NGOs, for communities to get access to governmental information, to understand what rights we have. And for the lawyer like me, I use that avenue to help the people from the very beginning, from the environmental impact assessment, from the licensing process, all the way into the court and to ask for the compensation. That was 2008, and 2008, there's a big event happened here. You must all remember, even though some of you may be still in the middle school, but you all remember the first ever African American president was elected, and he has brought a huge change to this country, and it was a very promising year in 2008. And in 2009, and some of you may remember the UNFCCC COP15 was held in Copenhagen, and that is a UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And during that conference, the COP15 is a parties conference, and all the members expressed the climate change is one of the greatest challenge of our time, and emphasized the strong political will to urgently combat climate change. The same year, I tried a case and to sue against a coal burning plant in Yunnan province in China, and sued against for the SO2 and CO2 emission, and the case was denied by Yunnan Environment Court. That was 2009. And 2011, Beijing experienced the crisis level of air pollution, and New York Times had an article named "Outrage Grows Over Air Pollution in Beijing." And U.S. Embassy played a role and to promote transparency of the environment data in Beijing, because U.S. Embassy in Beijing broadcasts its air quality data from its own monitor on the roof, from its own roof, and through the Twitter, and some Chinese media, social media bloggers got the data from Twitter and repost on Chinese social media, WeChat and Weibo. And that data from the US Embassy raised the doubts and anger from the Beijing residents around the Chinese government official announced environmental data, air quality data, because the data, you see the huge difference between the U.S. Embassy announced the data and the Chinese official data. And the Chinese official data announced the air was just fine, not hazardous, and just slightly polluted. And in 2012, next year, the Chinese Communist leadership has done the transition, and Xi Jinping became the chairman of the Communist Party and the president of China, which will change China's direction towards openness and political reform. And in 2013, he announced the Belt Road Initiative. Some of you may have heard about it. I will explain later. And that is China's central government-backed policy, and now it's reformed the global economy, and as well as our work, our career path. And it is his dream and ambition to bring all the natural resources which necessary to fuel China's own domestic economy. and increase China's global influence and reshapes the global order. The biggest event in 2015, the next year, is the Paris Agreement on the UNFCCC was signed by the majority of the UN member countries. China has signed it, ratified the next year, and pledged to lead the world to combat climate change. In the same year, 2015, China revised its 30-year-old environment law and announced a new environment protection law, which has a strong enforcement measure and has a chapter of the information disclosure, public interest litigation. And it was called a law with teeth, but I haven't got used that powerful law to bring more cooperation to the court because I have moved here to US in the 2014 and because of family reason. In 2016, and you all know, Donald Trump was elected as the president of the United States, and you all know what happened and what has happening afterwards. Starting from that year, I have been traveling to 11 African countries, 3 Latin American countries, and many back in Asia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka. All of those trips were to investigate Chinese companies' environmental human rights performance. And those countries are rich in natural resources but weak in governance. They all have received significant direct investment from China. I have a strong sense of responsibility as a Chinese environment lawyer after I saw Chinese companies are damaging environment, doing harm to people's health, crops, trees in Guinea, Ghana, Ecuador, Mongolia, and their parent company have done back in China. The sense of urgency and responsibility made me join the environmental law program, and with Bob Popozovo and Sima and the colleague here, and we start the Transnational Environmental Accountability Project last year. And when I mentioned in 2015, when the Paris Agreement was reached, China is a leading figure in that negotiation, and China said it will, no matter the U.S. stay or withdraw, China will keep the leadership to combat climate change. But then I just read 2 days ago a summary of this report called Out of Step, China is driving the continued growth of global coal fleet. And it said, this report is done by Global Environment Monitor and independent think tank, and the report finds from 2018 through the middle of this year, countries outside China decreased their total coal power capacity by 8.1 gigawatts due to the steady retirement and ongoing decline in the new coal plants. However, over the same period, China increased its coal fleet by 42.9 gigawatts, and as a result, the global coal fleet overall grew by 34.9 gigawatts. So that is a very dramatic number. China is also financing over 1/4 of all proposed coal burning plants outside its borders, including the most coal burning capacity under the development in South Asia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, among others. Combined with China's own domestic proposal, China is financing over half of all global coal power capacity currently under development. The path China chose could make or break Paris climate goal deals. What drives China to invest coal-burning plants outside its borders? I will explain later. Now I will walk you to some cases I have been working, but here is one of the coal-burning plants and financed by Chinese capital in Bosnia. And there are many more in other regions. And I was there early this year working with a local NGO and try to help them to understand more about Chinese laws and policy and see how to combat those Chinese investors and Chinese banks. And talk about the national accountability. I would like to share my the work while I was living in China and work for the Chinese NGOs. And China has made significant progress to form our own environmental legal system and the environment rule of law. And we made various environment, the pollution control law and energy law and natural resource management law. And we also have a various thousands of environment standard. But how we use those laws, how we enforce those laws, that is a key issue. And as an environmental lawyer, my role is to use, as I said, use those laws to protect the people from the harm, from the polluter, and correct the government's wrongdoing. Here's a case that is the first ever environment administrative case regarding the environment impact assessment. In 2003, the community in Beijing found there is a power line next to their building was under construction, and they found that project there's no any environment impact assessment, and so they request Beijing Environment Protection Bureau to conduct public hearing. That is the first ever public hearing under our environment protection law and environment impact assessment law. And after that is a hearing, and that after the hearing, the community didn't get what they expected, and they want to stop the power line project, but the government didn't support their request. And then we sued the lawyers, help the community bring the case to the court. So we represent the community, filed 2 administrative litigation. We sued Beijing Urban Planning Commission. We sued Beijing Environment Protection for their wrongdoing. We sent the legal claim, and we asked the government agency to create their wrongdoing, but we didn't win the case. The case lasted for 10 years, and the power line has been built and has been running. But that was the first case for the community, middle class community in urban China, and to realize what rights they have, what the right of the information they have, and they have a right to participate in government decision-making process. So that case became one of the model case and cited by our Supreme Court. And another kind of lawsuit is a tort case. Is the case where lawyers help the community to use the environmental law and the civil law and civil procedure law to get compensation and to get injunctive relief and to clean up the environment. And the first case here showed, actually the New York Times reported the case in the year of 2000, said a polluter, the pollution victim fight back. It's a dark farmer and find Club Way, the clinic, and the lawyer. We send the lawyer to help him, and we help them get the compensation. That was the first winning case, first tort case, and first winning case. And afterwards, we have many of the cases like that. Majority of our case and the court, Chinese court, are tort case. We use environmental law and the civil laws to help the people get compensation. It is not the perfect solution. It's the after-fact solution, because when you request a compensation, the harm has already done. The people already got sick and they lost their crops and the trees. But that is the legal remedy they can find, and they use the court to express their complaint to the company. Without that legal avenue, people won't have their voice held by the polluter, by the government. So we use the court to express our concern on the complaint. And there are many. One of the cases is the soil pollution in 2005. I couldn't get into the village during daytime because there was a riot, and any people from outside the town were considered, the enemy of the local government. And in 2007, I was investigating a mining pollution, and I was interviewed by the CCTV medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and we were talking about the water, why this river looks so red and brown, because all sorts of heavy metal could be found in this river. It's a downstream from the mining site, open pit mine, and you find cadmium, zinc, copper, of course iron, because the iron mine upstream. And we went to the village and we took the water sample. We tasted the water sample from the well. It is heavily contaminated. And we tried to find this class action at the court. The court rejected us. So we won some cases. This case we won. We won for the biggest class action. We won compensation for 1,720 villages in Fujian province. But many cases we lost. Like this case in Hunan province, and this person, our plaintiff, has already passed away when we had this trial. He was not in this picture. His family was in that picture. It's a very sad story. He didn't get any compensation after 10-year legal battle against the polluter, and he passed away because he got leukemia from the benzene pollution. In some case, we won a small compensation. We lost most of our legal claim, but the procedure became the legal empowerment, and we use litigation to shift the power from the corporation, from the government, to this activist. This one person, the farmer, used to be a farmer, and then after the litigation, he became an environmental activist, and he was helping other victims to file more litigation, and all the court was in his county and the city was scared by him because he always bring other people, victims, go to the court, and he got successful, and he even make a living by helping other people to file litigation in the court. And we call those people barefoot lawyers, and they are self-educated lawyers. And by the end of the 2012, and after 10-year efforts, we made a very significant legislative change. So civil society, organization, NGOs, and scholars, Chinese scholars, international scholars, we made our efforts to add the public interest litigation, the article of the public interest litigation, to our civil procedure law. So since then, and afterwards, we had the environment protection law accepted the same article. And now NGOs in China have legal standing to sue against corporation. And we, as an NGO, can you imagine, before we can only be the representative of the lawyer, we couldn't find litigation on our own behalf. And now NGO like Friends of Nature and many other Chinese NGO can go to the court, file litigation on behalf of the public interest, ask the corporation to correct their wrongdoing, clean up the land, and compensate to set up the fund to clean up the environment. So we explore the new legal avenue, and to protect our environment. Those are very promising progress within China. But when I mentioned since 2016, I started traveling to many developing countries which receive Chinese direct investment. I was thinking, back in China, we have quite a strong environmental law. How those environmental law can help the community in other countries? So that became the issue about the transnational environmental accountability. How we can use Chinese laws with support from the international norm treaties and the host country, the recipient country's laws, and make the Chinese company accountable for their environment and human rights performance. How we can help the community and to get the justice done. So now I have to explain what the Belt Road Initiative is. And look at this map. And so you can imagine what the belt and what the road is. The belt is the marine, or it's the Belt and Road in general describes the Asian China Silk Road and the Silk Marine Road. And all the way start from the Xi'an, the capital, the old Asian capital city, cross Central Asia and reach out Europe. And the marine the road, Silk Road, is from southern China all the way across the Indian Ocean, reach the East Africa, Nairobi and Kenya. And that became the Belt Road, where the initiative, the name came from. And now the Belt Road Initiative has already gone beyond the geographic meaning of the Belt and Road. It now more than 120 countries joined the Belt Road Initiative. And it is this man's dream, Xi Jinping's dream, and he wants change the global order, which built and led by the Western countries, Western powers, and he wants to shift that order to China need global power, and the Belt Road Initiative is one approach to the world. He wants to use Belt Road Initiative to show China now is powerful, is willing to lead the world, but lead to what direction? That is a big question. And China, now we do have this quite sophisticated regulatory regime on the outbound investment. We have government agencies, include the Ministry of the Commerce and NDRC, National Development and Reform Commission. All sorts of government agencies are in charge of the Chinese outbound investment. And we have regulations, but those regulations are quite low level, and we do not have laws to regulate from a high-level, high-rank regulation or law. We haven't had that yet. But we also have a lot of voluntary soft laws. And all those documents and laws looks like a very promising, can make China look very good. And the China claim, the government claim we will have a green belt and road initiative. Green and clean belt road initiative means the environment friendly and no commercial bribery. But what is the reality is, I want to show the cases since 1917. I visit, this is iron mining in Sierra Leone and Tankalini. The people look at this river, very similar with the river I visited 10 years ago in Guangdong province. The same kind of mine, iron and copper mine, and open pit without any proper treatment from the mining company. And another case, there's so many Chinese small-scale miners are operating in Ghana for the gold, and there's no any regulation can hold them accountable. They are just individuals. They went to Ghana legally or illegally, and they find their space and the great space and to operate, and they cause very huge environment damage because they never clean up the site, and they just leave this the huge hole along the riverbank. Next one, bauxite mining in Guinea, which is the major case our team, the T project, has been working on. And the SMB bauxite mining has caused more than 100 villages in that region. They suffered the shortage of the water, or they have to relocate it to other place. And they also suffered dust, noise, and unsafety issue caused by the mining road across their village. And this year, I took the team of the students, went to Guinea again. So we conduct the interviews with villagers, and we collect the water sample, we test the air quality, and we trained the local NGOs. We had a workshop on the health impact from the bauxite mining and on the Chinese laws and policy regarding the outbound investment. And that is, we are still working on that case. That case hasn't reached the litigation stage yet, but we are preparing to challenge government decision on the expansion of the bauxite mine and challenge the refinery, the EIA the report of the refinery, and the cobbling plant, which was served the electricity to the cobbling plant. And so the question is how the law works. And because when we look at those investments, all those investments share one thing in common. They are capital from one country flow to another country. So the issue, the environment and human rights impact has gone beyond one country's border. How can we hold those multinationals and transnationals accountable for their operation beyond one country's border and in a couple of the jurisdiction? And that is a new challenge brought by the global economic globalization to our generation or your younger generation of environment lawyers and environment activists. And we are still exploring which legal avenue we can use. Like this case I showed, I was standing in a courtroom in Ecuador as a lawyer, and they have never seen any Chinese lawyer in the Ecuadorian court. I was the first one. I was presenting my amicus brief. Amicus brief is not a Chinese legal way or a practical way to express my support to one party. I learned from the practice here in US, and because Ecuadorian courts accept amicus brief, so I wrote my amicus brief in 3 languages, Chinese, English, and Spanish. I expressed the Chinese law, Chinese government require Chinese company complying with host country's laws, and the Ecuadorian constitutional law require the company give the time opportunity for the indigenous people to be consulted, and when they try to enter this territory of the indigenous people, and indigenous people have a constitutional right to be consulted. And I explain in Chinese laws, Chinese laws require the company to organize public hearing to receive the public concern, and the people, native people, to express their concern. And those the two sets of the regulation or laws express the same value, that is, community have a right to say and right to express themselves. So I use my maker's brief to support indigenous people's claim, and they won the case. And the government, local government, had to revoke the mining license to the Chinese company. And because we all work together, the community, determined community, and the strong activist lawyer, local lawyer, and with my tiny help, but I hope I can use this model for many other cases and find other legal avenue to use the law to protect the people and shift the power and unleash the power from the community and from this community who suffered from the corporate power. And that is my role, and I hope some of you will find your path as me to help community and clean up our environment, protect our mother nature, and find your true north. And I think many of you are the students and find your career path. And I hope some of you will become the international environment lawyer. And I will be here. I'm very willing to help you find your path. Thank you.
So we have time for a couple of questions.
I've been working on several projects in the United States, mainly in Maryland, with solar. And the best solar panels are coming from China. And we are amazed at how developed and how efficient these solar panels are. Do you know anything about what's going on with renewable energy in China?
Yes, I think China is a global leader of the renewable energy, but in the meantime, we are still developing our coal burning plant capacity. So it's look like it's controversial, but this is what China is doing anyway. And because our economy requires a huge energy, and the renewable energy, I think, is not enough for our domestic goal, and that is the reason we are still developing the coal burning plants within China. And beyond China's border, that issue, we are financing more than 1/4 of the global coal burning plants. And because of the Belt Road Initiative, I said, because this is China's plan to bring the profits back to China and to expand China's global influence. That is a part of the influence, and we are supporting all these coal burning plants in those countries which desperately need energy, like the Bosnia-Balkan countries in Africa. They need electricity, and in Southeast Asia, in Pakistan, and in Egypt, you can find the Chinese capital flow to those coal burning plants.
Well, thank you very much for a very nice presentation.
Yes.
What ability do you have to bring an NGO to bring a claim in China for the actions of a Chinese company in Africa to try to join the activity?
Yes, that actually is. I have been thinking to use Chinese NGO and supported by a foreign NGO, like the NGO, African NGO, and as a joint plaintiff to find a public interest litigation to address Chinese investment cost human rights or environment impact in that one of the African country or Latin American country. I have been looking at the right case to bring back to China.
And China also has a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, almost exactly like the U.S., but they've never had a single prosecution.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question. How has China strengthened its legislation to prevent environmental disasters like mining disasters and coal
Within China, I think that China has been doing a great job and to reduce environment impact but outside China is different story because you see the investment, those capital, Chinese capital, always flow to those countries with rich natural resource but very weak institution, and the host country laws matter. And if you have weak environmental law in those recipient country, it's simply hard to hold the Chinese company from very beginning, from prevent any harm happen at first stage. And so we have to improve the law, environmental law, rule of law, the environment global governance globally, not only within China.
Okay, one last question. Okay, well, we especially would like to once again thank the Feder family and Alan Garten, who is here as well. Thank you so much for coming. And we also wanted to give you advance word that next April 10th, we're going to be hosting a big conference at the law school on transnational environmental accountability, where we're going to bring in some of the representatives of these groups who are working with Jingjing on these issues from various parts of Africa and China as well. So let's thank our speaker once again.